So what we want to take a look at is how the storytelling supply chain is evolving. It's happening quickly. There are a lot of changes happening. I hate to use the term Wild West, but that is essentially what's happening now. We even, in the course of putting this presentation together and this work for a client, we talked to a lot of lawyers. The last person you want to talk to when you're talking about creativity, but they get a really good sense across the spectrum of deal terms and negotiation and what's happening there. And what we found is that they don't really know what's happening either. So we'll talk a little bit about that. No surprise here. When you take a look at what kind of advertising consumers like and dislike, anything that's like super interruptive, like online pop-up ads or pre-roll video ads, they're really not very fond of. About 3 out of 4 have said that they have an unfavorable view of online pop-up ads. So consumers don't, they're pretty hostile to anything that interrupts their experience. As a result, we're seeing that there's a lot more being invested in content marketing. And right now, it's considered to be about a $16 billion industry. And when you take a look at the rate of growth, it's even more impressive because it's about double that of the overall industry, overall ad industry today. What's happening is that marketers are increasingly interested in brand storytelling. That's why you're here, in content marketing. And what they're doing is very often setting up in-house content and production teams. They're taking, I work with a lot of agencies. It's a tough time to be an agency these days. You're getting asked more and more to do more with less. I talked to one CEO of an agency who had been offered she's a CEO of a smaller agency who had been offered a CEO job at a larger network in North America, and she turned it down. I was like, why would you turn that down? And her answer was, I was so tired of managing decline. I wanted to work on something that I could be creative and manage growth for once. These brands are also, these are just a few of the brands that are taking their, some of their content marketing in-house. It doesn't just mean film, it doesn't just mean television, it doesn't just mean digital. MasterCard, for instance, is actually producing their own podcasts around managing money. So they're really looking at, like, when they think about brand storytelling, they're looking at every distribution platform, every medium out there, what are their opportunities? So we know that there's a hunger right now for great content, for compelling storytelling, for charismatic characters, but marketers are increasingly looking at video as a way to actually do that. So about 87% of marketers today are using video in some way for their brand storytelling. Not a surprise if you take a look at what's happening here these next few days. We want to also take a look at what's happening from the platform side. And what we found is that platforms are acquiring everything at every price in every genre. There is such a hunger right now for as much content as possible that is why you can't keep up with your Netflix anymore. You can't keep up with your subscriptions. Who feels like show of hands, who feels stressed by their queue on their Netflix? You're never gonna get through it. Queer Eye, 4th season? Didn't they just come out with the first last year? So the rapid pace of acquisition continues unabated. What we're seeing is that it's not about quality versus quantity. It seems that way, but David this morning brought up a really good point that what is quality to you may not be quality to the next person. That is a very subjective definition of what is good versus what's not good. What we're finding is that for the platforms, it's really about quantity and quality. It's about both. They want both. Not everybody is going to be HBO. Even HBO doesn't want to be HBO anymore. They have for so long been associated with premium content, with sweeping the Emmys, with all the awards, and they have very recently talked about the fact that they need more quantity, not just quality, in order to compete in a Netflix world. So what does that mean? We're going to go through a couple of the implications of what this, Wild West, gold rush. I hate all those really hackneyed old Western metaphors, but they seem to be appropriate here. In terms of consumer behavior, we're finding that about 1 in 5 online video customers are paying for 3 or more streaming services. Show of hands, who has more than one, sorry, who has at least three streaming service subscriptions? So yeah, this is, it's a lot more than 1 in 5 here, but look at where we are. It becomes unmanageable. Streaming media devices are also penetrating the household. About 40% of US households now have a Roku or an Apple TV or some sort of streaming media device. And what's happening is that consumers are already starting to feel that they're paying too much, that they're reassessing the value of their traditional pay TV. About 70% feel they're paying too much, and we're seeing it with people cord cutting and cord slicing. So reducing the number of cable subscriptions in favor of SVOD, OTT, all the options available. In terms of the industry, no surprise here, we're seeing that the legacy networks are launching their own streaming services. Disney Plus is coming out soon. CBS, or All Access, is kind of killing it. They have taken their IP, like Star Trek, and they have been able to fund that series without ever spending a dime because of global rights. Netflix bought the global rights for Star Trek. I believe it was Netflix for global rights. They were in the black before they ever shot a single frame of film. Right now, Star Trek has a deal with Amazon for the Jean-Luc Picard reboot. So it becomes very difficult for consumers who are completists to not have more than one, they have to have more than one subscription in order to be able to watch Star Trek on CBS, on Amazon, on Netflix overseas. So we see the networks are essentially launching their own competitive streaming services. So what's happening is you have this consolidation. It's a call to arms, but what's really happening is you have this verticalization happening, where entertainment companies who used to focus very much on distribution are also becoming an integrated producer. They're a studio, they're a purchaser, they're a distributor of content, similar to the way Netflix has modeled itself. In terms of the numbers, Netflix had about 700 original series in 2018, and very often you'll see an original piece of content that was actually an acquisition from Sweden, from the UK, from elsewhere, but they call them originals, about 700. That's why you feel like you're never going to get through your queue. You're always going to be overwhelmed. We'll never get to that 4th season of Queer Eye without making it through the first 3. They spent about $13 billion on content in 2018. That's an enormous amount of money. The only company that comes kind of close is Disney, which spent about $12 billion in 2017. HBO only spent about $2.5 billion. CBS 4, NBC Universal 11 billion, Amazon 5, and Apple, it's believed that they spent about $1 billion in 2018. In terms of impact, we wanted to kind of split it out in terms of what that means for the media and content owner versus what that means in terms of marketing. So for the media owner, there's a land grab happening right now to develop original content, to acquire original content for these streaming services. We already talked a little bit about the fact that it's not enough to be a channel operator. You also need to be a studio. They're putting more and more emphasis on their studio and production side than they had been in the past. And then contract terms, this is where it gets kind of wonky, but it's all in flux right now. I talked to one television writer who had sold a series to Hulu, and he told me that his lawyer called another lawyer at another firm who had negotiated a similar deal to Hulu to find out what the contract terms were, because they had no idea how to actually value what this series was going to look like on Hulu. So even the lawyers are trying to figure this out. It's really interesting. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that there's all this debate around SVOD versus premium television, and now that guys like Netflix and Amazon and Hulu are pushing really hard into awards. They're making the case for the lawyers that that SVOD should be valued in the same way as traditional content, which formerly had very different contract terms. What this means, though, for smaller independent productions is that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity for them to find more funding, find new audiences. There's just so much money going through the system right now that if you can get yourself heard, then you can actually find funding. In terms of marketing, what we're finding is that it's really, really hard to break through the clutter to find new audiences. There's a real shift right now in non-working ratio for marketing, non-working budgets. It's a kind of a term of art that had fallen away for a while, but usually your media budget is your working budget, and your non-working budget is your creative, production, overhead, stewardship, etc. And we're seeing this real shift into more and more dollars going into what's called the non-working. It really is kind of a crappy term, but because it's always working. But into the non-working, the creative and production side than it had been in media. We're finding that advanced analytics becomes increasingly important to finding new audiences. And the platforms themselves are looking for better marketing efficiencies. We're finding that windows have become smaller when it comes to releasing new content. One example is Schitt's Creek, which is now released 24 hours from Canada to the US. It used to be months horizons, now it's 24 hours. And they're getting smarter about riding the coattails of their competitors. So Hulu dropped their Netflix Fire Festival doc just days before Netflix had invested a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money in marketing their Fire Festival doc. Show of hands, who watched both? So it seems to have worked. It was that rising tide lifts all boat, but Hulu was pretty smart about how they had ridden Netflix's budget there in order to gain an audience for their Fire Fest doc. So brands right now want to reduce that non-working ratio at exactly the time they need to invest in production. So right now, the ratio of non-working to working for traditional media is 12% versus 88%. If you look at search and display or mobile and social, you'll see much more investment in what we call the non-working ratio for content and production and creative in digital media than it has been in traditional. And the reason for this is that the media with a higher non-working ratio usually is more effective. And I hate to sort of use that hackneyed paid, owned, earned, but in this case it kind of helps us. Studies have shown that earned and owned media tends to be more effective than paid media. Doesn't mean you abandon one for the other. They all kind of work in conjunction with each other. But brands should not be reducing their investment right now in the kinds of content that tends to be most effective. One reason for this, though, is that production costs are rising because of OTT. Blame Netflix entirely for this. 100% their fault. In 2012, doing a high-end cable or streaming drama for about an hour was 3 to 4 million. Single camera comedy was 1 to 1.5 million per hour just in 2012. 5 years later, it had doubled. So, high-end cable was 5 to 7 million per hour, comedy 1.5 to 3 million per hour. Blame Netflix. You can blame them for a lot. But I'm being a little facetious, but it is, in fact, their fault. OTT platforms are spending really aggressively. They are creating greater competition for premium content. They're spending more. They're essentially raising the floor across the entire industry for great content. It's become really competitive to find and acquire really valuable content. The storytelling itself has also evolved. It's become longer form, more ambitious, more visual effects heavy. You can blame HBO for that, I guess, if you need to, but with Game of Thrones, they have essentially created more of a market for visual effects heavy, longer form content. Upfront talent costs are increasing because there's no profit participation on the back end anymore. With streaming and with OTT, it used to be really valuable for producers, writers, actors to have profit participation on the back ends with DVD sales, et cetera, that has gone away. That's the reason that Amazon and others are spending a metric shit ton, for lack of a better word, on big, talent, like a De Niro, like a Pacino, because they know that they're not making that money on the back end. Video on demand expands the shelf life of shows, so budget expenditures are now amortized over a longer period of time. So we've done away with that back-end profit participation for DVD sales, but VOD has extended the shelf life of content. Bigger production budgets also mean a bigger licensing fee for the production studio. And the glut of content also means, no one really thinks about this, but a lot of the production crews and showrunners don't necessarily have a great deal of experience when they're in that role, and what you have is sort of runaway costs because they lack the experience of reining those costs in. There's a lot of people flooding into that industry now. So the streaming services themselves are trying to carve out a niche via different genre strategies. I think over time, these differences will start to disappear. You can see that Netflix already is pretty evenly split between comedy, sci-fi, and drama, whereas Amazon has leaned more heavily into sci-fi and drama. HBO, obviously, heavily invested in drama, and Hulu has invested more heavily in comedy. So right now, there's like a little bit of differentiation. I don't think that's going to be sustained over the long term. So when we talk about what gets produced, what gets developed, the thing to keep in mind is that decisions don't really begin with data. Everyone thinks that there's some secret formula to creating resonant content that lies in the data, and what we found is that that is not really true. I'm sorry about all the small type. It's all in the white paper. But there's this idea that Netflix knows all of our secrets and is able to create, with an algorithm, content that will resonate with a particular taste cluster. That's just not how they do it. Ted Sarandos and others have been really clear about the fact that data only tells you what happens in the past. It's not going to tell you what works in the future. And they operate like any other studio. They take bets on what will resonate in the future. Where data does matter, though, is in terms of marketing and promotion to find audiences. Just a few years ago, Netflix was saying, we don't really need to market because the best way to market ourselves is within the service itself. We're able to push content to interested audiences within that service. I don't know how many people here are from Los Angeles, but have you driven down Sunset Boulevard lately? Netflix owns almost every single billboard on the Strip. They've spent $150 million, which for a company spending $13 billion on content is really just a rounding error. But they are spending that much money just on outdoor billboards to probably make their execs happy. But we are finding that in order to find new audiences, analytics, advanced analytics, understanding more precise taste clusters instead of traditional demographics is really important to finding those new audiences and amplifying that through your working media ratio. And we've also found that new metrics are starting to emerge. I think David talked about it a little bit this morning. One that we're finding more and more is this idea of survivorship. So it's, did an audience watch a series to completion within a certain amount of time? For Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, it's usually 28 days. Or did they abandon it midway through the season? So just wrap us up with a couple of sort of ideas of where this is all going. I know short form versus long form. When we talked to one lawyer who works across a lot of entertainment clients, he said, we're really not seeing much in the way of short form these days. It's branded content only. No one else is working on short form. We're just not negotiating those deals. We think there's still life in short form, not just for branded content. So it definitely has contracted, but we are definitely seeing that companies are betting on it. So I think because of the shutdown of Verizon's Go90, it never really gained traction. Everyone thinks short form is dead. But we also have Quibi. It's kind of a terrible name, but Meg Whitman and Jeffrey Katzenberg have raised $1 billion in order to go forward with high quality, high value, short form video meant to be consumed on mobile devices. Facebook and Snapchat are still very aggressively moving into short form, developing and acquiring content. The majority of it comes in about 3 flavors: news, service journalism, and branded storytelling rather than sort of pure entertainment. And what we're also seeing is that short form is being used as an incubator to test concepts before the investment in a longer series or movie. In terms of scripted versus unscripted, I talked to a producer at a network television show about budgets, and he said when he shoots in downtown Los Angeles, what he pays for parking and food for the day is the budget for a season of a reality TV show, which tells you why reality TV is still so attractive as a potential platform. I know when people think about reality, they're thinking, maybe it's about a surgically enhanced woman in Orange County holding her throwing wine, not her drinking wine, getting ready to fight. At least that's what reality TV is for me. But every single network right now has a mandate for high impact, original, unscripted, that they want to become successful long-term IP. They don't look at unscripted as like a one and done strategy. It really is about, can I build another Real Housewives that moves into this franchise that moves into city, into city, into city, and then globally. Even in 2015, Netflix was saying that they did not care about unscripted. They had no use for reality TV, that it was off-brand for their network. But take a look this year, we've got Queer Eye tidying up and nailed it. That's just since, I think, January or so. So right now, 1 in 3 subscribers to Netflix are watching a Netflix unscripted show monthly. Huge appetite for unscripted when you expand the definition of unscripted past my favorite Real Housewives. In terms of what works on a network, the tone for a brand really needs to match the network's brand and platform. Fox has said they are looking for mavericks and innovators when it comes to their unscripted. E! Has been desperate for a while now to replace the Kardashian franchise, but they want strong female stories. And Facebook is also interested in unscripted and has said that they are interested in the type of content that utilizes their platform. So, live voting, live programming, anything that is sort of unique to the Facebook platform is going to be resonant with their audience. In terms of what that means, there's a really large universe of unscripted out there. Again, it's not just Real World or Real Housewives. Docu-series like A Day in the Life, ocu-series where they're following nurses, for instance, through their job, or fishermen, or truck drivers. There's a big audience for. Competition and game shows, still very popular. Travelogues, comedy. Legal, still very popular. The court and prison and crime dramas. We've seen from podcasts like a real rebirth of true crime that has started to make its way even into premium content on HBO and Netflix. Transformation, about weight loss and addiction, social experiments like wife swaps and lifestyle, renovation, wedding, craft, tons of opportunity there. So what are platforms looking for? Again, I apologize for the small print, but this is all in the white paper. We want to sort of lay out, just for sort of the FANG plus Snapchat universe, where budgets are. So, for someone like Facebook who has said that, they're looking for these simple organizing principles that uses their platform. They do not want music content because of the rights are too complicated. They don't want kids programming. Hard news and event TV, not really looking for it. Their budgets are $10,000 to $35,000 for about 5 to 10 minute episodes, up to $250 for a longer piece of content, 20 to 30 minutes long, $1 to $3 million for Facebook Live. So those budgets are starting to get up there for Facebook. For Amazon, they love unscripted, premium docs especially. They love big names. They're spending big on that. In terms of what they're not looking for sports right now, not looking for stand-up comedy, For scripted, they're spending 2 to 10 million. I don't know if you looked at, anyone watched The Boys this week that dropped on Amazon Prime. It's like an superhero show, very effects heavy. A friend of mine is a producer on it. It's 10 million an episode. It looks it. Apple, they have this underlying theme of wanting to push humanity forward. That does not mean religion for them. It doesn't mean stand-up comedy or anything about China. They have said that projects about China are kind of a little bit of a touchy subject right now. So they are competitive with other premium outlets, so about 2 to 10 million, similar to Amazon. Snapchat, similar to Facebook, they do not want any music, anything to do with music because the rights are too complicated. Kids programming, when we're talking about like under 13, is also a little scary for them, but they are really interested in content and series that focus on the native aspects of their technology for young adults. So anything that uses like the lenses or multi-screen, they're looking for ways to sort of bust through the technological capabilities of their platform to create new content. 60 to 50K per episode, 10 to 12 episode series, about 3 to 5 minutes in length. Netflix, they want channel-defining shows like Stranger Things. They are one of the only platforms that have a global platform. They are funding so much of the TV we're watching right now in America, and it's getting exported out into global audiences. So they're really looking for something that they can drop, like a Stranger Things that they can drop globally. And also looking for a male follow, we were told. They don't want quiz shows. They don't want home fixer-uppers. They've got their fill of that with Marie Kondo. Their unscripted is about $250 to $450 per hour. They're open to half hours. And that's just for unscripted. Their premium stuff, again, 2 to 10 million about is the range. YouTube, they also are looking for documentaries, so unscripted there, big appetite for that. They're looking for docu-follows. They are looking for music shows. They're not looking for game shows, weight loss, fashion, trashy TV, pranks. They've got their fill. They're good on those. And they are looking for about 400 to 800 per episode for half hours, and about double that for hour long. And again, all of this is in your white paper. You can just sort of thumb through and read at your leisure. So just in terms of sparking discussion, I want to leave with a couple of questions. What platforms and formats make the most sense for my brand? Where will my brand resonate? What is the ideal ratio of media budget to creative and production? Do I have the right resources in place to effectively execute with the right partners? Am I partnered up right? I mentioned it's tough to be an agency these days because they're not always thought of as the right partner for this type of content. What are some of the likely obstacles I'm going to encounter to distributing my content? That may be, it may be political. We talked about that in some of our breakout sessions. It may be logistical, but what are those obstacles? And then what are the best KPIs? Is it survivorship? Is it engagement, as we talked about this morning? But how do I find those KPIs? And also, how do I access that data coming from Maker? Anything that's distributed through YouTube, you are fairly limited in the kinds of data you're getting back. Think about if I have a KPI, am I also able to measure it? Because we can only really improve what we can measure. So that's it. Thank you all. Appreciate it.